Welcome everyone to our today's webinar where we talk about attack surface management, also known as ASM. So for the rest of the webinar, I'm going to refer this as ASM because every time I say attack surface management, it'll be 30 minutes before we actually get to the insights. With me today, I have two esteemed panelists. Nami George, who is VP of IT Operations and Security at Pacific Dental. His background is very diverse. He comes from product management, he comes from the technical background, governance, compliance, leadership. But the most Nami is known for is giving back to the community. He is current chapter president for ISEC Orange County chapter. He also sits on the board for various cybersecurity leadership executives such as CISO Roundtable, and he's always ready to give back to the community. He's always willing to actually go in and help security leaders, practitioners to get to the right mindset, the pain points he had lived through his life, and he's trying to help you. And that's what Nami is. Our second panelist today is Snehal. Snehal is CEO of Horizon 3. Before he actually founded Horizon 3, he was CTO in the United States Special Operations Command. Also, Snehal was CTO of Splunk, CIO within GE Capital, and he is also holding 18 patents granted by USPTO in data processing. So he is well-versed technical person, but also held executive leadership positions where he's going to talk about how he transforms the conversations into starting with technical to board level or board level to technical. I am super excited that we're going to hear from these two gentlemen about attack surface management. With that, I want to welcome both of you. Snehal, Nami, welcome to this webinar.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
So let's just jump right into it. What I want to ask our audience for a second, what do you think ASM, attack surface management, means to you? Is it vulnerability management? Is it vulnerability assessment? Is it penetration testing? Is it continuous validation of your security controls? What does ASM means to you? Let's ask yourself for a second. And one better, if you're going to write it down, because towards the end of this webinar, you will know if your definitions, your understanding was correct or not. So take 10 seconds and actually go ahead and write it down. Now, ASM is a view for looking at your attack surface from outside in. Vulnerability management is also known as where we can sometimes interchange those terms, but vulnerability management is really a view from inside out. And our panelists will actually give more insights into it. So, Snell, I want to start with you. What does ASM mean to you today? What would you tell our audience so that they can actually make sure that what the responses they've written down on that paper is right or wrong?
Yeah, let's there's always two ways to think about this definition. There is the kind of the vendor alignment to various Gartner categories view, which you kind of have to play that game because that's how vendors survive. But there's the view I care more about, which is the view from the person sitting in the seat that has to make a few very hard decisions. One, the hardest part of my job as a CIO was deciding what not to fix. So I don't care if I'm vulnerable, I care if I'm exploitable. And where am I exploitable? How quickly am I fixing those exploitable problems? How often are they reoccurring and why? Because if I'm fixing an issue and it just shows up again 2 weeks later, I'm just playing whack-a-mole. And how has my exploitability changed over time across my environment? So that's kind of one aspect of it, which is number one hardest part of my job was, what am I not going to fix today? The second hardest part of my job was going to an IT admin and telling him or he or her that you're going to have to skip your kid's basketball game tonight and stay late to patch this server because this is a critical security issue. Well, that doubles down on if it's vulnerable, but it's not exploitable. Think of Log4Shell as an example. Just because you had the Log4j jar file doesn't mean an attacker could exploit you. You could have put a single egress network control in place to prevent the JNDI outbound call from being occurred or from taking place. So if I'm going to make you stay late, I better be damn sure that you're staying late because this is a critical problem that is exploitable, that justifies you skipping time with your family. And the third hardest part of my job was proving to my leadership that we're actually getting a return on our security effort. So for me, if I throw away kind of the vendor-aligned category definitions, which oftentimes frustrate me as a practitioner, what I care about is what is my exploitable attack surface? how quickly am I reducing that attack surface over time? And how effective am I, and how can I prove my effectiveness to leadership? Knowing that attackers don't think about external versus internal, they don't think about vulnerability versus pen testing. They're going to find a way to come in from a guest credential from LinkedIn data to a reused credential from your compromised Netflix service, maybe break through your perimeter, maybe buy access through an access broker. Like, they don't think about it as external attack surface, internal attack surface, vulnerability management. And I think that we need, as practitioners, to align ourselves more to the way attackers think about these definitions, which is, can I achieve a particular outcome versus category alignment? So I didn't want to go to my soapbox, but hopefully that sets the tone for the conversation.
It does, and more. I think one of the research 21 Institute just revealed recently is 60% of the organizations, they were breached because of unsecured attack surface. That simple. Now, Navy, when you are at your hot seat every day in the morning, when you start your day, how are you thinking about attack surface management? And to Snail's point, where it's not just about where my vulnerabilities are, it's not just about my attack surface, which is not secured, but really what is exploitable? How do you validate that? And what does that ASM definition or the program looks like for you, Navy?
Yeah, and really good intro there, Snehal. I think I look at it in two ways. First of all, I'll kind of look at it from a practitioner, meaning someone in the operations team. So for someone in operations, attack surface management is essentially look at your infrastructure, look at your estate outside in. If you were on the other side of the fence and you were trying to attack this organization, what are all the assets? And I think you can't talk about attack surface management without really honing in on assets. What are all the assets that are discoverable for an organization or an entity? And sometimes we confuse attack surface management for external attack surface management, and they're related, but external attack surface management, and there's so many vendors out there that have been doing that for years. They're looking at all your publicly discoverable IP addresses, all the low-hanging fruit. But you've got to go beyond that to how can an attacker use one of these assets that they discover, and it may not just be an asset in terms of an endpoint, could be an identity, could be a protocol, a connection, whatever that is. How can they use that to get a foothold within your network? And when they do get a foothold in your network, what is that blast surface radius? How far can they go? How can they move laterally across your organization? And if you don't understand that as a practitioner, then you really don't know what you're protecting, and you don't really know what you're protecting against. So you have to be able to map those scenarios to your organization to see if you are protected. So that's the operations view. From an executive view, I've got to know where I'm spending my money. I've got to make sure that the tools that I have in place within my organization are the right tools, and that those tools are actually effective. If I have approved the budget to have an endpoint detection or response tool, for instance, then simulate an attack on your endpoints and see if your tools actually respond in the way that you thought they were going to respond. And a lot of times we don't test that. We're putting a lot of things, we take at face value what the vendors tell us, and we don't have a way to test if those tools are as effective. So in just kind of concluding the question, what is attack surface management? Know your assets, have visibility across your entire estate, understand the weak points, which is where sometimes people get this misrepresented with vulnerability management, understand where you're vulnerable. And then that helps you build a program on having to shore up your defenses so you're better prepared in the event that those attacks occur. And the one last point to mention that Snehal mentioned when he talked about exploitability. Super important. We have resources that are super scarce in this industry. So you have to put your resources to use, and you have to put them where they're most effectively used. And so knowing what vulnerability or what exposure or what weakness is more susceptible to an attack, so you can focus your efforts there. That is the best way. It's just a common sense approach of managing resource risk, vulnerability, and all of those things that as leaders we have to deal with every day.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think the way I see it, attack surface management, ASM, really takes the macro view of an organization's potential vulnerabilities, and it just does it by identifying and managing all possible attacks in the digital space, external, internal. While vulnerability management, it takes that micro level where now I know this is what I need. If it's exploitable, I need to patch it. Nimi, how do you align your? Sorry, go ahead.
I'll say I'd actually disagree with you a little bit there. I was one of the largest customers for the top 2 vulnerability management companies that were out there. A
Yeah.
vulnerability management piece of software assesses a single machine in the context of a single machine and
Yeah.
iterates through known CVEs and only known CVEs. Rarely do they look at misconfigurations or so on. And so when you talk about a micro, you're actually talking about very specifically what could be vulnerable on a single machine. But
Yep.
that's not how attackers operate. Attackers are stringing together issues across multiple machines to achieve an objective. And so, I think the failure of so many attack surface management companies, there's a reason why very few of them have broken out to be big value companies, is because they're too macro, which is they're too theoretical, they're not precise enough. And then vulnerability management is too myopically focused on a single machine, and attackers are operating in the dark space between those two, which is finding a compromised credential or easily cracking an MTLM hash, and then using that to chain together a misconfiguration in Jenkins with a misconfiguration in VMware, leading to a compromised credential or domain compromise or so on and so, or leading to the lack of OS credential dumping being configured in Trend Micro, and then leading to. Attackers are chaining together lots of misconfigurations and compromised credentials across different machines, and neither of those 2 categories have specialized in that area, which is why even if you have a robust vulnerability management program and a robust ASM program, you're still ending up in the news because attackers are operating in that dark space.
Yeah, and that's right. I think one of the things, and we talk about defense in depth as a practitioner, offensive side or the adversaries, they also have that you mentioned chained, where they want to chain the vulnerabilities or the potential ways to actually get into the environment. So you're absolutely right. So let me ask you this: if vulnerability management and ASM are not looking at that cohesive, context aware, and that chain way of actually getting into the environment, then what is it looking at it? Who is looking at it?
Yeah, so let's answer that in I think 2 ways. The first is the current state of the market. The viable way to chain together issues to identify your exploitable attack surface up until recently was hiring pen test consultants to come in and assess your environment. The problem is there are only about 20,000 or 22,000 certified ethical hackers globally. And it takes about 10 years to go from start to getting your OSCP to building enough operational experience to be a senior ethical hacker worthy of the fees that they're charging you. So we have an insanely constrained supply of ethical hackers. And so as a result, people are only able to assess their exploitable attack surface once or twice a year, and even then a very narrowly defined scope. And so when you think about what is the role of AI in this area of security assessment, it's how do you leverage AI as a force multiplier so that humans focus on the part of the problem that humans are uniquely gifted at. Humans are uniquely gifted at finding logic flaws in custom code. That's our superpower as human beings. We absolutely suck at correlating and connecting data across 100,000 different hosts in your infrastructure and trying to find these paths. That's a graph analytics problem that machines are far better suited at. And so when you think about the current state, it is you need to look at human machine teaming of humans focus on the parts of the problem they're good at, AI focus on infrastructure testing and exploitability of infrastructure at scale. But going forward, what I think we're going to see, and we're going to see this in Gartner categories and so on, is a rapid convergence of these siloed ASM type categories where you had pen testing as a service, external attack surface management, autonomous pen testing, governance, risk, and compliance, think like security scorecard and so on, vulnerability prioritization. All of those are these super siloed tools that really need to be integrated together into one cohesive platform. So I think today, what you're looking at is a fundamental disruption of labor, right? Especially or a shift in labor of humans focusing on the parts of the problem humans are gifted at. But I think tomorrow you're going to see a massive consolidation of point solutions into an integrated platform.
Maybe with that, when you are considering or when you have adopted and made ASM as a program at your company, how did you align to your business risk profile or the framework of your organization so that it, to Snail's point, it's not just a point solution, yet another point solution. It's something integrating within the business. It's integrating something within what business is looking for. Eventually, vendors will come up with that cohesive one platform which integrates all the pieces Snail mentioned. But as far as goes to business, how did ASM actually align with it?
Well, I think in my case it was pretty easy, right? I think you look at any other sphere of life, we don't do a one-time point in time assessment and suddenly assume everything is great. And Snehal made a great point. If you want to get a great pen tester, they don't come cheap. And most organizations, unless you are contractually mandated to, most organizations will do a pen test once or twice a year. And let's really drill down to what a pen test is. You have 100,000 IPs, you test 10 of them. You have 1,000 Wi-Fi networks, you maybe choose 2. If you have, broadly speaking, 3 types of networks across your organization, you choose 1 in each category. And you essentially are saying, making the assumption that by testing this very, very narrow subset of your macro environment, you're then given a broad health check to the rest of your environment. Now, it does a number of things. And whilst I'm in no way advocating that people don't do penetration testing, I think penetration tests should be a little bit more targeted. If you're, adding a new network segment, if you're delivering a new product, pen test that product as part of your release gate process. So before you go live, you go through some series of validation, but using pen testing as a barometer for the health of your network, I think is very misleading and actually counterproductive in a lot of cases, because people then wave that flag and say, well, we had a clean network, which might amount to less than 5% of your, in this case, your attack surface. Selling this to my organization was pretty much saying, hey, let us do our daily hygiene, our weekly hygiene test. Let us get this practice in place of continuously validating the controls that we have, continuously looking at our environment, not once a year, but let's test the controls. And from a business standpoint, we've already made investments in security tools. We've already made investment in security personnel. How do we know that these investments are working? Right? It's just like brake testing your car. You've got to test it. You've got to make sure that those tools are in place. And in a lot of cases, using ASM, and this is the commercial aspect of this, using ASM and continuous validation and testing of your controls and the tools that you have really leads you to streamline and consolidate your investments in security tools. Right? It really helps you drive and it helps you focus your security budgets on, in some cases, other areas where you have gaps. And that is really the language that organizations, leaders, boards across the country and across the globe really speak. They know they have to make investments. They want to make sure those investments are effective and they're getting the most value for the money. And from a pure security construct, it's just a way to do it. There's really no other way for you to test and validate your environment if you don't have, whatever you call it. Could be a tool, could be scripts you run internally. However you start small, start large, but you do have to have something that does the validation, and think always like an attacker would who's coming into your organization.
Yep. Snail, you talked about the future, the tomorrow of how this space is going to consolidate some of that, and that will help organizations, customers, enterprises to actually look at ASM a little bit more holistic instead of having these single point solutions. But today, if a security leader, practitioner, architect is actually evaluating ASM solutions and they would like to buy it, what specific criteria should organization look at or at least consider during the selection process of an ASM? And if you can share some key metrics to use to measure effectiveness of an ASM, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so let me tell you what my buying criteria was when I was a buyer of ASM tools in my past job and past life. The first thing I asked was, can I safely run this against my production systems, internal production systems and external production systems? And the moment the rep got a little nervous and the engineering team got a little nervous, that was a concern for me, because you don't want to just blindly execute a memory exploit against the VMware environment, because you could destabilize the environment and take out your systems. So are you safe to run against production? Number one. Number two, can you assess my entire environment in one test, a whole 100,000 hosts, or do I have to carve you up into small chunks of 2,500 IPs or 1,000 IPs, whatever the limit is, and just do one little radar sweep at a time? Because attackers don't do that. Attackers are going to meander through a credential in one environment to a file share in another, to a host in a third, across all 100,000 of your IPs. So if I'm just doing a 2,500 IP radar sweep, that's not going to be sufficient. That's number two. Number three is, do I have to actually write my own run books to be able to assess my environment? Or are you able to dynamically discover ways to compromise me? Because think of when IBM played Gary Kasparov in chess a bunch of years ago. IBM didn't hard code 40 million chess games. They looked at every piece on the board to determine the next best action. And so the fundamental failure in this realm was people gift wrapping compliance automation with ASM or with autonomous pen testing. And that's really what happened. I mean, I was one of the largest BAS, breach and attack simulation customers globally at one point. And in 60 days into using those products, I realized that they're just glorified automation tools. I had to actually hard code my own attack run books. And I spent more time maintaining those run books than actually assessing and improving my environment. And the larger the environment, the more intractable that problem is, meaning there are so many permutations for how an attacker can become domain admin. You can't possibly hard code that into run books or scripts and then maintain it. So the three assessment questions I asked initially were, are you safe to run in production? Can you assess my entire environment? And can you do so without requiring specific expertise or professional services, which means an IT admin or a network engineer with zero offensive security experience should be able to point, click, and shoot and hack themselves. And that became the first three criteria in assessing these things. And then separately, I started to look at the key outcomes I wanted to get into, which is help me prioritize problems that actually were exploitable, help me verify the blast radius from different points of view. Namely, mentioned the importance of understanding blast radius. And then three, help me be a sparring partner against my SOC so I can improve my detection and response over time. And so those were my criteria when I was a buyer.
Snell, if you have not done it already, please write a book on this one so the future generations can continue learning from this. There's a lot of wealth of data and information with you, so we want to continue sharing that. But no, you're spot on. I think those criteria are really good. Cybersecurity leaders, practitioners, when they're looking at ASM solutions, they should go through that. They should go through that as a measuring yardstick and make sure that if your solution, to your point, if an SC and AE is starting to get nervous based on those, then you know where the solution lands. So maybe let's talk about incident response. I know that's a top priority for every security leader when they're working for a company, enterprise, organization. Snail, I'm sure you've gone through that as well during your practitioner roles. Incident response is top priority for us to make sure that continuously we're revising that in DRP and BCP planning and the security side of IR. How does ASM fits into that? And specifically, the question is, does it make it better, or is it an additional step that engineer has to go through during an IR process that now they have to look at another tool when it comes to IR?
Well, I think, and just before I do that, I would just add to what Snehal said about scoping. I think the point about running in production is super important, and I'll just add a little color to that. You know, for an ASM tool to be successful, it's going to run continuously, and that means using resources, right? Consuming resources across your environment. So, a part of running in production successfully is you've got to make sure that your ASM tool doesn't become so noisy, because I guarantee when you speak to folks, especially those who manage things like databases, one of the very first things they're gonna tell you is, hey, this is gonna cause performance impacts. So you need a tool that is able to run, but not consume a ton of system resources. It also needs to have all the things we talked about, Victor, in your introduction. We talked about the difference of vulnerability and ASM tools. Well, a good ASM tool has got to have that vulnerability component as part of it. And it's not just about endpoints. It's got to be able to look at things like misconfigurations as well. And this is where sometimes the vulnerability tools are lacking, because they're looking at, you know, defects in code rather than configurations that may just be nothing wrong. There's no defect, but it's configured in a way that isn't secure. An ASM tool has got to do that. And if it doesn't do that, then you really just have a vulnerability tool that is running round the clock. And back to incident management, I think this is where another point that Snehal made about AI. You cannot possibly look at every permutation, combination, every scenario in the book and anticipate playbooks. And where an ASM tool really comes in to help you out with incident management is, hopefully you've run enough simulations, enough various attack scenarios across your environment that you understand lateral movement, you understand blast radius, you understand impact, you understand the dependencies and the relationship within components. So in the event that you have an incident, it's almost like playing back the tape, and you can say, I've seen this movie before, because in my ASM test, this account was compromised, and this is how far this went. Now, with this incident, we're only at step 2, so maybe we should go to step 3, 4, and 5, just in case I've missed something there. But it allows you, when you're doing your incident management and ultimately onto forensics, be a lot more thorough in your approach, because you've looked at all the different, and I love the different scenarios. I love the example you used about chess. That's really what it is. You've anticipated a bunch of moves on the table, and you're making those moves ahead of, hopefully, but if not, at least behind the attacker. You're able to make those moves so you can then, get to containment, eradication, and recovery as quickly as you can. But if you don't have those scenarios mapped out, built out in the logic, then you are going to be reactive in a lot of your incident response processes.
It's like if you think about your cyber terrain as a graph, a knowledge graph, and if you've got 10,000 hosts, that knowledge graph is going to have 1 billion nodes and edges. That's how dense the relationships are between hosts, ports, services, credentials, access those credentials have, and so on and so forth. If you can envision a knowledge graph, what you're going to see are certain nodes and edges are waypoints in the context of an attacker achieving their objective. And so I think the really interesting point that Naomi made was, if you understand those waypoints in the journey an attacker takes to becoming a domain admin, then when you're in the middle of an incident, you see the first waypoint get touched. Well, well, look, if they got to this waypoint, these are the likely waypoints they would have reached next. And you can skip to the next waypoint and either jump ahead of the attacker, or at least more aggressively catch up to the attacker, because you know the waypoints better than they do. They're still discovering those waypoints along the way. You've already understood and learned about them in your organization. You're going to be able to skip to those major intersections in the map, if you will.
Still, we can't end or finish a webinar without talking about AI, so I must. How should an ASM should leverage AI and machine learning? And you both touched upon that a little bit, where when we look at incident response, or let's look at the proactive approaches of just discovering your attack surface. And I know for a fact, when we talk to security practitioners, they always have this, I don't know everything. There must be some hidden asset or network or a machine where it may not be connected today to the internet, so my one scans are not picking it up, or it might be connected for a short period of time. It's short-lived that by the time we get there, it's already disconnected, but it has some sort of code it's running it. So the point I'm trying to make is, how does AI or supervised machine learning can really help ASM solution get better, specifically in the field of detection, specifically in the field of automating the detection of your assets and attack surface?
Yeah. Well, I'll start. So let's break that into a couple of different kind of sub questions. So the first thing is, attackers know more about your environment than you do, and just take that as an assumption. And if you think about what the reality of a corporate environment, a company was acquired and then acquired again and then acquired again and acquired again, and now some poor SAP and IT admin or network engineer is inheriting a whole bunch of digital properties and attack surface that nobody knows about because it's multiple acquisitions over time. And that's the reality, especially in really large companies that are out there. And so attackers have the patience to learn about those environments, and they know more about it than you do as a defender. And so, how do you back this idea of human machine teaming? Leverage internal asset discovery, external asset discovery, and so on, so that you also understand the environment as well as or better than the attacker. And we've seen some really interesting innovations there in the market. I mean, what HD Moore did with Rumble was really interesting in his ability to help fingerprint and do asset discovery. Jupiter One was doing that, and a few other companies as well, Exonius, in just straight up network enumeration. And that's cool, but that's only a small slice of the problem. But that's an important step in the journey towards identifying your exploitable attack surfaces. Well, what do I even have as assets? And then from there, you want to layer that with, okay, now that I understand through network enumeration, recon, and discovery what I have, how do I identify misconfigurations, harvested credentials, exploitable vulnerabilities, dangerous product defaults that haven't been updated? And how can those lead to waypoints on your way to a technical objective, domain admin, compromise, sensitive data exposure, so on and so forth? That part of the problem is a Markov decision process reinforcement learning problem. Because the more attempts you make at exploitation, the better your weights are going to be in your decision making of, should I maneuver to the router, the television, or the printer next? If as I've compromised an initial host. Well, that decision is based on discovered services, historical record of success, and probability of achieving the technical goal you're trying to achieve. And that is a problem well designed for at least just straight up machine learning, but reinforcement learning makes that better, so that the more pen tests you're running, and this is what we do at Horizon 3, the more pen tests our product runs, the smarter it's getting because it's updating its weights and decision making through reinforcement learning techniques. So that's kind of what you see today. I'll pause there and talk about what you're starting to see in the news of GPT and so on. But I'm sure Naomi and Victor, you guys got a ton of stuff to elaborate just on those pieces of machine learning in network enumeration versus infrastructure exploitation.
Yeah. Nemi, go ahead. Give your opinion about how AI machine learning can really help practitioner side. And again, detection is the piece where we're discussing where it can help the ASM make better decisions, and again give a better visibility for a practitioner to when, if not it's going to happen, they have an ability to actually contain the widespread.
Absolutely. And I think, look, the reinforcement learning piece is super important. I wouldn't cover that too much because I think, you did a great job. But here's the thing, we have a lot of turnover in the industry, in IT, and especially when you look at the high-end security operations analysts, there's a ton of turnover. Right. And when you have tools like this that are essentially performing the pen testing and they're baselining, and then they're reinforcing the learning, and you have more data sets, more IPs, more assets, more techniques that you're then using, you're just having a constantly enriched and keyword historical baseline of your environment. When you don't have turnover, as long as you have the log retention, and even if you don't have the log retention, for the time that you have the logs available to you, that trains the model and makes the model smarter. So you have a process that is essentially by design going to get better at doing things faster, smarter, with that historical context of past success, exploitability, the barrier to success, and all those sort of things that we need, which ultimately means that you, as a human analyst, when you come into the mix, you spend your time on the areas where you need a human for business context, right? For organizational alignment and things like that. So we can focus on those areas and let the machines do what they are, just by nature better at doing.
I think these insights, the criteria to choose ASM and where the market and innovation is heading, I think this is very helpful. As we're wrapping up this webinar, let's do takeaways. So my three things for our audience here is, first, if you're considering ASM, first of all, as Nami and Snail mentioned, that know your assets a little bit, know your business a little bit, so you can understand exactly how you're gonna manage that ASM part. Because ASM is not something that you blinky box, you install it, and all of a sudden it's gonna give you everything that you need to know. You need to add a context to it. What are you looking for? So if you don't know what you're looking for, it's very hard to ask the machine that question. Machine will do it for you, but if you don't know what you're looking for, it'll be very hard. That's one. Second, which goes back to a little bit about the processes. Technology is just one piece of it. If the process is not there to actually go to the next step from here. So yes, ASM found problem, or it can give you visibility, it can give you a nice report, it can tell you what do you do next from there. Know that. Do you have bandwidth? Do you have people? Do you have skill set? Or do you have a partner that you rely upon to do the next step from there? Don't just buy the tool and have a nice report and that is it. We all have made that mistake. Let's find the next step. What do I do after this? Otherwise, this investment is waste of time and money, actually. Finally, my ask is all of my fellow practitioners and leaders. Anytime we're thinking about any new program, first go back to what you already have on your priority list. And if this new initiative program can complement, augment, and help you expedite those priorities, great. If not, come back to it when it's the right time. Don't prioritize this over because this is something we are saying, but this is something that your business should need as well. And your security program is ready to actually embrace it. So that's my three things. Snail, what about you?
Yeah, my three key points are number one, assume breach. Attackers are going to get in, and you need to focus on what's actually exploitable. The second thing is attackers don't hack in using 0 days like you see in the movies. They log in with credentials that they've harvested through a variety of means. Your credential attack surface is probably the biggest attack surface you are exposed to right now. And the third is something my commander within the Special Operations Community said to the organization in me, which is, don't tell me I'm secure, show me. And then show me again tomorrow, and then show me again next week. Because our environment is constantly changing, and the enemy is always evolving. And if you take those three to heart and rebuild your security program around those three principles, then for every patch Tuesday, you've got a pen test Wednesday. Every time you're onboarding new employees, you're validating that they haven't added to your credential surface because they haven't reused a compromised Netflix credential as their corporate email password. And if you assume breach, you're going to be able to validate each of your layers in your defense in depth strategy so that you understand the blast radius of a compromise in any part of your environment, and you can build the muscle memory required to isolate the impact of initial access in all of these different spots.
I'm trademarking that one, by the way. Don't tell me we are safe or secure. Show me we are safe or secure. So I'm trademarking that one.
Awesome.
Jamie, what about you?
Well, I'll say three things. The first is assets, right? Every information security program starts up with discovering your assets. And whatever tools, including ASMs, that allow you to discover what your true assets inventory is, not the endpoints and the servers and the cloud resources you have in your environment, with everything. And by assets, anything that is of value, anything that can be attacked or leveraged for an attack within your environment, that's what you should focus on. If your security program doesn't have that, then you need to focus on that. So assets, number one. Number two, risk. Ultimately, our job as information security practitioners is risk management. And tools like ASMs allow you to manage risk, which is about exploitability. It's about the likelihood of exploitability. It's about how difficult it is for you to carry out an attack successfully. And then ASM focuses you on those areas. So if you have limited amount of staff, which I think everyone listening to this has that problem, you can put your resources where it matters most. And then the final piece is continuous testing, continuous validation. Whatever your program is, however secure you think you are, if you don't have a method to continuously validate the controls you have in place and continuously test that those controls are still holding up in the face of modern threats and modern threat actors, then you should really think about how you achieve that within your organization.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both, Nehal, Naomi. Thank you very much for giving your insights and enlightening us on this attack surface management topic. And I want to thank all of you who tuned in and watched this webinar. Thank you.